All right, so in this video today, we're going to go over how we installed the clutch, the flywheel, and a new spigot bearing, or some people call this a pilot bearing. So anyway, let's get started. First things first, this is the old pilot bearing, so let me show you what the new one looks like. It is quite often the case. There's a lot of variation in parts. I ordered this a spigot bearing. Most people call it a pilot bearing, but I ordered this and it was in the description. It said 18V, an 18 GB engine, and so I'm like, okay, I got the right one, but no, actually not. This is the one that came out of the car, and you can see that's significantly smaller. I'm obviously not going to put it back in. It's a little bit banged up, no better for wear. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show in not just this part number, but I'm also going to list the other part numbers that you may need regarding based on what type of your engine you have. And I would highly recommend that you take out the old one before you buy the new one. In my case, I'm not going to order another one. I'm just going to cut this one down to size. It's just brass. This brass bushing is a little bit more than just brass, though. I don't know if you can see on the inside. Kind of a rough texture. So what the old salty mechanics will tell you is that these bushings are made to be porous and that you're supposed to soak them in oil prior to installing them. With that said, you don't want to put any oil on it when you install it. I know that makes absolutely no sense. But this is going between the transmission shaft and the flywheel. And you don't want any oil to fling onto the flywheel and cause your clutch to slip. But with that said, if you do soak this overnight in oil, oil will permeate through these little pores, and a little bit of oil will be left in there, and it will, through heat and expansion, it'll make itself available just in little tiny portions as needed by the bearing. You can see this is the previous bearing. It's got a little bit of wear on it. Probably could have continued to use it, but it's one of those things where, you know, when you got the engine out and you're replacing the clutch, you should go ahead and replace that pilot bearing. So enough ado about nothing. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut this, and I'm going to soak it in oil, and then I'm going to put it into the freezer. And by doing that, it'll reduce the outside diameter. It'll make it a lot easier to press. So moving on. All right, so I got it all chopped up, and I've cleaned up the edges nice. Looks brand new. One thing I would advise, though, is if you're going to do like I did and end up adjusting a bearing that's too long, definitely check to make sure that it's still round when you get done. If it's not round, it won't even go on the shaft. You know, obviously, when you're trying to get the engine on, if this thing is messed up, it's not going to go on. You'll be fighting with the engine forever. So when you put this in the vise, make sure that you're just really being very careful not to push too hard. It is brass, it'll smash. So anyway, this is just confirmation that it does go on. And this is the bearing surface that it will touch. It's very smooth. It's all good. So into the freezer. All right, so I'm getting ready here to put the pilot bearing in. This is the old one. I just kind of set this in there so that I can preset the bearing puller. Obviously, I'm not going to pull it with this puller. I'm going to use it to push. I got a couple of 7/16 by 20 bolts at the hardware store. These are 3-inch bolts so that they give me a little bit of space. I've got a washer and kind of a wide socket so that I can use this to push the bearing in. So let's get started with this. First off, you're going to want to set it all up so that it's, you got to make sure you have plenty of threads on your two leg bolts. You want to make sure that they're the same length, because otherwise you're going to start going at a different angle. You can see how if I tighten, as I tighten this one, it starts to straighten out. Okay. Let me just check those real quick. 4 inches at the top. Yeah, we're golden. All right. So the new bearing, I had it in the freezer. You can see I put it in top of a paint can. It's filled with oil, and I'm about to take this out and clean it up. See how it's almost frosty, it's so cold. The reason why I had that in the freezer is to make it easier. The ambient temperature out here in the garage is about almost 100 degrees. It's 105 here in Texas today. So the temperature of this bearing is easily 20, maybe 30 degrees tops. It's freezing my fingers to get this oil off. And I had it soaking in the oil so that the pores in this bearing would get filled with oil. We're not going to have any opportunity to add any oil to this, and we don't want it to be dripping. So it has to be pretty clean. And we're just going to rely on the oil that permeated through the porous structure of the brass bearing here. And we're going to go forward with that. Okay, I'm happy with that. All right, so this is very cold. It'll be a lot smaller. It should slide right on you real easy to get it started. Here we go. It's a little canted. There we go. Okay. Whoops. Try that again. Okay. That's in there. Let's take our spacer. Now the reason why we're using an apparatus here and not just tapping this with a hammer is you don't want the edge of this bearing, which is very soft metal, to become deformed at all. And this will prevent that from happening. Okay, you're set. Maybe a ratchet would be easier to do with a brake instead of a ratchet. Okay, you can see it moving in place there. It's moving pretty easy. I'm just holding this spacing unit here with my hands. Sliding right in place. You can see on my finger there I used a small bolt on the end of this fender shaft. Fuck. Fucking thing threaded. Well, isn't that how things work out? So a little minor setback here. The center of my puller, I've used it so many times, as the threads have become stripped. So I'm going to drill that out and either retap it or use a nut on the end to advance the threads through the end of that shaft. But, you know, not everything goes right. It's better that your tools break than the hardware that you're working on. So check back as soon as I get this back into operation and we'll get going again. So I had a little video malfunction there, but you didn't get to see the final push. But I did get it in. The little apparatus that I was using here, I had to put a different bolt in it because it turned out it was the bolt that was stripped and not the threads of the puller. But anyway, that shoved it right in there, no problems. It went running without making any kind of dents or deformations around the outside. It's nice and clean. I think that's gonna slide really well. Now, if you don't put a pilot bearing in right and you get a nick on the edges or something like this, when you get to putting that engine in, it is a very tight fit, and you'll have difficulty trying to get it to slide into place right. So it's one of those things where you got to get it done right the first time, or you'll suffer later in the project. Okay, onto the flywheel. All right, so putting the flywheel in. Seems like a pretty straightforward deal. First of all, you notice how clean and shiny it is there. We had the flywheel resurfaced when we had the engine reboard, so I'll insert a video real quick on how the resurfacing the flywheel worked out. Pulling out the drift pins from a flywheel before we can surface it. So real quick, Jeff, why don't you show us how that works?
Okay. Yeah, so we're going to surface this whole entire face, and these are going to get in the way. I already pulled one, so we're going to put this is a dowel pin puller tool. We're going to slide it downwards, it'll secure it, and then we're going to slide up and it'll pull the pin out.
Ting!
And then you just tap it into this little tube, and it'll drop the pin in there.
There you go. Have the right tool for the job. Excellent. No clutch slippage for me. Gotta break some eggs to make an omelet, right? Okay, so with that handled, you notice on the flywheel here you have an array of bolt holes. These two here go on the studs. The rest of them are going to go are going to be screws for, or holes for screws. So anytime you're getting something together, make sure the mating surfaces are clean. No burrs, no dirt, nothing scuffed it. I think we're golden here. So let's set this thing in place. Kind of heavy. All right, I'm going to kind of hold that. So the bolts that I have set up here, I've cleaned the threads, and I'm going to oil them because they take 65 foot-pounds. This little dealy bobber here is goes underneath the bolts, and you'll be able to pull these little tangs up to make sure that they get locked in place. But these pins are not sliding right on, so I'm going to put a couple of these bolts in place and pull the flywheel into seat. we'll continue. All right. When you're looking at your flywheel, you might want to consider buying a new one if you have problems with the teeth. These teeth are actually pressed in, and you can actually replace these teeth without having to replace your flywheel. Another thing to inspect with your flywheel, and in this case you can see I had it resurfaced, is if there's any wear from the clutch. And if the flywheel itself is kind of like a brake disc, there's a little bit of wear on there, you can have it resurfaced. And they also, you can get a reduced weight, a lightweight flywheel. There's some performance enhancements that helps out with. Okay. All right, those are just kind of seated. But you can see the pins are seated in there nicely. Let's go ahead and oil these up, get them in place. The reason why you oil bolts when you're going to put torque on them is if there's any kind of debris or any kind of an obstruction, you'll get a false torque reading. And so since these are high torque bolts, these are going to take 63 foot-pounds, although I think I'm just going to set it to 62. I don't know that I can get 63 on my torque wrench. The higher torque settings, you want to make sure you get a good accurate torque on these bolts. So having a little bit of oil on them really helps out. I know earlier in the video I talked about not putting oil on stuff because you don't want it to fling out onto the flywheel, and here I am putting oil on stuff. But this oil is not going to be a problem. Very little bit of oil. And I'll wipe it all up, and we'll use some brake clean when we get this thing ready. All right, slightly torque these. Okay. So getting torque on a spinning object is always difficult. You always have to find a way to jam it. And in the case of your flywheel, normally you can find a place where you can slide a screwdriver in. Not exactly certain I can do that on this one. But we'll find a way to get that to stand steady. Let me take a break. All right. Last thing before we start getting the clutch going is to bend these tabs. See if I can get the pliers in there. Get them to bend. Okay, so moving on to the clutch. Once you start talking about the clutch, you got to talk about being hospital clean. We absolutely don't want any hot spots, any kind of lubricant anything that can cause contamination between the flywheel, the clutch plate, and the pressure plate. Okay, so first thing we're going to do here, we're going to clean off the flywheel with a little brake clean. It's going to get all the oil and any fingerprints or anything on there that is going to cause any contamination. And it dries pretty quick. Got a brand new clean rag. Clean all this out really nice. See all that goo? Didn't even think it was there at first, did you? Okay. Another. Make sure we have nothing. Look at all that goo. Just like cleaning a rifle. You want to clean it until your cloth comes away clean. And it's still coming away dirty here. So I'm going to turn it inside out and try again. Spotless clean. Getting there. Okay, I think we're good. Nice clean surface. Next thing you need to do is you need to work this pressure plate, or this is the actual clutch plate here. Don't ever want to touch the outer surfaces. This is a clutch alignment tool. Basically, you just slide it in here. It goes into the splines. This part here will go into that pilot bearing that you just put together, and it sits there waiting for you to put the pressure plate on. But what that does is it helps you to align it up. Everything stays aligned so that when you put the pressure plate on, you don't have to worry about it sliding around. And then before you tighten it all up, you want to make sure that it is absolutely centered, right? Those splines are what's going to connect to the splines on the transmission shaft. All right, and so here's the pressure plate. We're going to do the same thing on the pressure plate that we did with the flywheel. Start out with a brand new rag. And try not to get any brake cleaner, any place where it doesn't need to be. This is brand new, so it's going to be a lot easier to clean. We're just basically getting fingerprints off of here. All right, so now you can see how that works. The flywheel is on one side of the clutch plate, and then the pressure plate is on the outside of the pressure plate. And when you can see these springs down here, when you push on those with the throwout bearing, then the clutch is released. This pressure plate backs off, and it gives the clutch a relief so that it can move off. All right, so let's lay out all the bolts. Let's make sure we got everything all lined up. These bolts are going to be torqued to 20 foot-pounds. Got all my bolts and all my lock washers all lined up. Okay. So just like on the flywheel, it had some studs. These little studs here help to align it, so when you're getting it together, you don't have to worry about where everything goes. Likewise, on the pressure plate, those studs line up as well. So, see these bolt holes? The larger bolt holes are where the screws are going to go. And on the other side of one of those bolt holes, you'll see where the stud goes. Just like that. See how this clutch alignment tool works? Once you get it all bolted in place, you can be able to pull it out. So I'm just lining it up to make sure it's nice and centered before I start putting bolts in. Now, one of the things you probably can't see is the gap. You can see this gap right here. I'm going to put a screwdriver in there right now. That is the gap that is going to be taken up by the spring of this pressure plate once we get all these bolts in. So, line some of these up. Okay, torquing these to 20 foot-pounds. Doing a cross pattern. Anytime you have to put torque on something, always do it in a cross pattern. That is a clutch installed. Just to review, today we installed a new pilot bearing, otherwise known as a spigot bearing. We installed the flywheel, cleaned up the flywheel, installed the clutch and the clutch pressure plate, and now we're ready for the engine to go in. So stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe, leave comments if you have suggestions, and we'll check in with you later. Have a good day.